All right, so I'm going to be talking about defying the odds, overcoming stress. And for the past over the past 35 years, my students and I have been studying trauma. And we're trying to look at the impact of stress on individuals' functioning. And one of the things that's helped us do that is a greater appreciation and understanding of the brain. How many of you guys are studying parts of the brain? Yeah, we all love it, the neurosciences. And because of our greater understanding and appreciation of the brain, it's helped us significantly. Biomedical researchers have been able to actually decrease the rates of leukemia as well as heart rate. So my question has been, how can it help us with psychology? That's the question. What are the implications for psychology? So I just want to share with you how I became interested in psychology. And in fact, it went back to 8th grade. And my science teacher asked if he wanted us to understand the scientific method. How many of you guys are familiar with the scientific method? Yes. What's the first step of the scientific method? Observation. Excellent. And so what I wanted to do is an experiment looking at observation. And so what I chose to do was to look at something as simple as candy wrappers. And so what I was going to do is try and determine what kids did with their candy wrappers after school. Whether they would put them in the garbage can or they would throw them on the sidewalk. Guess what I did? Yes, threw them on the sidewalk. So, in doing that, I found that to be very interesting. And then years later, I went from studying human behavior and throwing trash, throwing paper on the sidewalk, to studying human behavior and stress. Human behavior and stress. And I asked myself a number of questions. I did some observation, and I looked at different kids and different people that I knew. And I had the question is, why is it that some kids start out so well and end up not doing well? They hit the ground running, but they never finish the race. So think about the star athlete, the star musician, the star actor, the kids that really start out well and things don't work out. And so there were a number of different hypotheses that I had. And one, was it due to genetics? Was it due to diathesis? Could it have been due to poor family? Or could it simply be bad luck? Why is it that some kids did well and other kids did not? Well, again, the common denominator was stress. So speaking about stress, my next slide, here we are, next slide. How many of you guys have experienced stress? All right, yes, here's the kind of stress you've probably felt. Academic stress, taking tests. Little stress? How about doing homework? Yeah, okay, all right, I got the right crowd. How about social stress? Don't look at the person next to you, right? Okay, social stress is another one. How about extracurricular activities, sports and dancing? And yeah, okay, we got folks there. How about family stress? Things going on at home? Yeah, stuff happens, right? And then how about health, having health problems? Well, guys, those are common everyday stressors, and most of you get through that quite well. But there are another group of stressors that we've studied, and these are more traumatic stressors. And what we're talking about here is like Hurricane Katrina. You guys heard about Hurricane Katrina? Yes. House fires. Some of you have experienced house fires. They've been found to be very devastating. Wildfires, not a lot in this area, but certainly out west. And then car accidents. All of these are stressors, and they can lead to long and lasting negative consequences. Now, there's another group of stressors that lead to even more negative outcome. And these are stressors that we call interpersonal violence or man-on-man violence. Okay? People intentionally do things to hurt you. And so we're talking about physical or sexual abuse. We're also talking about mass shootings, witnessing domestic violence, violence at home, bullying, abandonment, losing a loved one, family members put in jail. All of these are stressors, and they can be major stressors, and they can lead to very negative outcomes. Now, unfortunately, stress doesn't only impact adolescents. and young people. They also impact children. In fact, a recent statistic, 20% of children who experienced trauma had school problems, emotional problems, and physical problems. A lot of problems resulting from trauma with very young children. Also, by the age of 16, how many of you guys are 16? How many of you guys are younger than 16? All right, what the data say is by age 16, 68% of you, almost 70% of you will experience a traumatic event or a potentially traumatic event. Okay? Not good news, but the good news is there's ways of getting through it, right? All right. Rates of behavioral problems increased by 50% after the second trauma. So there's the first trauma, and you're kind of hanging in there, and then there's the second trauma. It can impact you even more negatively. Now, what are the consequences of trauma? Let me run you through this. You may not be familiar with much of this. Okay, first of all, how many of you guys have heard the saying, what doesn't kill you? There you go. Most of you say makes you stronger. But from our research, it's often the case that what doesn't kill you weakens you. It lessens your ability to move forward. It weakens you. There's a couple of areas where it actually impacts the human body. First of all, it's neurobiological. The brain can actually be impacted. The second is the immune system. That's the system that helps you fight colds and diseases, right? The other is the cardiovascular system, your heart. That can be impacted. And last but not least, the endocrine system. And there we talk about stress, the stress hormone, cortisol. Okay? So these are areas that can actually be impacted by stress. By the way, those of you guys that are taking notes, if you want a copy of this, I'd be more than happy to send it to you. So what does the science of recovery tell us? This is what we've been studying. What does it tell us? It tells us a couple of things. One, who's most likely to do well following a traumatic event, and who's most likely to do poorly? Well, those that do well have what we call social support. How many of you guys have heard that term? Yeah, social support. That's the support of moms and dads and friends and mentors. Okay, those are the people that do best. Now, how many of you guys remember the unfortunate event with Sandy Hook? Yes, approximately 26 individuals are killed. How tragic. And there was just another shooting yesterday in Oregon. Every time those things happen, my heart just sinks because of the negative impact that it has on individuals. And I was fortunate, humbled, to be called by Dr. Oz and asked, how do children recover? How can moms help children recover? And my response was, it's social support, right? It's social support. People being around you, hugs, kisses, okay? It's support. You think about it. When bad things happen, we all want to help. That's just a part of who we are. We want to help. Our heart goes out to people. And that's why after shootings and killings, you see things like balloons and teddy bears and flowers, right? That's social support. And again, that's been found to be very helpful following traumatic events. Now, let me say this. Who does poorly? Individuals that do poorly are those who are most exposed, those that experience injury or know someone that died. That's one predictor. Another is loss. Losing a significant other, losing time, losing a job, losing a home. That's another predictor. Additionally, avoidant coping. Usually, now think about it. When bad things happen, do you want to go back to that situation? No. You typically want to get away from it. And what people do following traumatic events, they avoid situations, people, thoughts, etc., as it relates to the traumatic situation. We avoid. That's what we typically do. Additionally, previous traumas. People that have had previous traumas typically don't do as well as those that have not had traumas. And last but not least is the history of mental illness. So if you were depressed before it happened or you had anxiety before it happened, that's another predictor of folks not doing well. Now, here's what we know. On a following traumatic event, well, we know very early on in age, children are wired to respond negatively to traumatic stimuli. This little guy depicts kids following Hurricane Katrina. He's crying, he's very unhappy. Why is he unhappy? Because he's facing a traumatic trigger. A traumatic trigger is something that keeps the bad thoughts alive. It keeps it alive in memory. I was told by parents 2 or 3 years after the storm that if there was a cloudy day or a rainy day, their children would become very upset. They would cry, they would become dysregulated, and some of them were actually re-traumatized. So just the trigger of it, just seeing something that reminds you of the bad event can produce negative findings. Now, early on in life, we're actually wired to respond negatively when we see negative stimuli. Would all you guys say that's a negative stimulus? It's a negative stimulus, okay? And what happens is we've actually found that brain structure, brain functioning actually changes. It affects parts of the brain. It affects the prefrontal cortex. That's your concentration, right? That's your ability to attend that lessons. Your hippocampus, that's the learning and memory center. Your ability to learn, your ability to recall information, that can be impacted. And last but not least is the amygdala. And the amygdala is the emotional brain. It becomes dysregulated. You can't control your emotions. Now, you might say, if you had a group of children and that you could provide shelter for them, clothing for them, warmth for them, that they would probably do okay. Well, not so fast, my friend. It was found following the reign of Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania that there were children that were in orphanages. And these kids had shelter, clothing, food, but what they didn't have is social support. There was no connection. No one ever hugged them. No one ever touched them. No one ever looked them in the eyes. And the consequence of that is these children not only stopped growing, but they actually shrunk. A very negative consequence of stress. Now, so the question, guys, is not if stress will occur, but when stress will occur. It's not if, it's when. And then the question is, how will you cope with it? Now, typically, if you don't cope with it well, there's general distress. There might be depression rather. There might be phobias, okay? There might be panic or panic attacks. And one often overlooked problem is post-traumatic stress disorder. How many of you guys have heard the term post-traumatic stress disorder? Great, good, the word is getting out. We used to think that post-traumatic stress disorder was only related to veterans, okay? People who had gone to war, people who had actually had combat. But we now know that post-traumatic stress is much more prevalent than we once thought, okay? And with post-traumatic stress disorder, in fact, I'm just going to back up just real quick here. With post-traumatic stress disorder, you can experience flashbacks. That's like reliving the event. You can experience sleep disturbance, difficulty going to sleep at night, or difficulty waking up. There could be avoidance, as I said before, people, places, and things that remind you of it. Anger. People may become very angry when they're confronted with traumatic events. Physiological reactivity, heart rate, and poor academic performance. There are children who don't perform well academically because of traumatic experiences that they may have experienced. So the bottom line is there are both psychological and neurobiological consequences following traumatic events. So the question is, what have we learned? I'm just going to quickly share with you some of the things that we've learned in terms of what helps following bad situations. Now, this depicts me several years ago. This was immediately following the Virginia Tech shootings. It was one of the darkest days of my life. And one of the things that really assisted me and other folks on campus getting through this was social support. Phone calls, good feedback from family members. Being there was very helpful in terms of moving us forward. So again, social support, being very important. Now, how about our work from fires? We received a $1.2 million grant from the National Institutes of Mental Health to study fire. What was the impact on individuals functioning following losing your home to fire? And what we found is that, once again, social support was very helpful, having loved ones around to assist you. Also, religious coping. Some of the data seemed to suggest that people who prayed seemed to do better than those that did not. So, social support and religious coping. Also, following the Virginia Tech shootings, we found active coping was very helpful. What is active coping? Active coping is being involved in the recovery process. Active coping is helping out, being there to help others. That seems to be very beneficial. Self-esteem, the way you feel about yourself. How many of you guys feel good about yourselves? Wonderful. All right, feeling good about yourself is what we call an important protective factor. Also, forgiveness. We did a study where we found that following the shootings, that individuals that were able to forgive the shooter did better than individuals that did not along an important dimension. So again, forgiveness can be very helpful. Following Hurricane Katrina, there was a very interesting finding that showed us what helped individuals following that storm. So we had a couple of hypotheses, going back to the scientific method. The hypothesis is that many individuals would develop post-traumatic stress disorder, many would also develop depression, and they would also have higher rates of suicide. Those were the hypotheses. We confirmed two of the hypotheses. The first one was they did develop post-traumatic stress disorder, they did develop depression, but they did not develop suicide. And so we asked the question, why would that be? Well, as we went back through the data, let me tell you what we found. First of all, we found that they told us that they were able to do more than they thought they could. They had a greater ability to move forward than they thought. Secondly, they told us that they felt closer to their family members. Again, showing the importance of family and social support. Last but not least, they told us they had a greater faith in God. They were able to move forward because of those three things. Now, the take-home message. You all know Oprah. Don't know if you know this about Oprah or not. Oprah gave birth at 14 and lost a child and came from an abusive home. But look at Oprah today. She made it. She made it. Despite the odds, she made it. And you can make it despite the odds. I'm going to leave this. Don't clap yet. I'm going to leave this. I'm going to leave you with a little metaphor, something that I learned in my travels doing trauma work over the years. I spoke with a rocket scientist, and I was just talking to him about engines. I've been interested in engines. And he told me, he said that rocket engines, or a rocket doesn't have a single engine. He said a rocket may have 3, 6, 9 different engines. And he says when these engines work together, they produced a certain positive outcome. Now, let me ask you this. Does anyone know the name of that term when rocket engines work together? I'm listening. That's close. That's close. That's very close. The word is gimbal. G-I-M-B-L-E. They gimbal. And he says when they gimbal, they produce maximal thrust, maximal efficiency, and maximal direction. And I said, what a metaphor for helping individuals that have experienced trauma to move forward, right? That's a metaphor for that. And so the bottom line is, in terms of reaching your dream, it's important that the maximal thrust, you need family support, you need friends, you need community. In terms of maximal efficiency, teachers, counselors, mentors. Maximal direction is reaching your goal of becoming a heroic leader. My last point is, how many of you guys have heard Michael Huff, who says, let's get ready to rumble? He does that just before a fight. Well, Dr. Jones is telling you all, let's get ready to gimbal. Thank you very much.